Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be joined today by Beth Francis, the CEO of the Essex County Community Foundation. Thanks for joining, Beth.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, maybe you could start by just telling everybody a little bit about the Essex County Communities Foundation, or ECCF.
Sure. So we're a 22-year-old community foundation. Our mission is to inspire philanthropy in Essex County, and we connect our donors with the causes that they care about. So ultimately, we want our philanthropy to improve the lives of the 800,000 people who live here in the county. We do this in three ways. The first is we provide tools for people to be charitable, like funds here at the Community Foundation, and we connect them to the causes that they care about. The second thing that we do is we strengthen and support nonprofits. We are one of the largest funders in Essex County, and we do that more than just with our funding, but we also do it with capacity building training for board leaders as well. And then the third thing that we do is we bring people together to talk about challenges here in the county. And it's a cross-sector convening of funders and our municipalities and our nonprofits to really drive and understand the root causes of what's happening in the county and invest in systems change work that can stem from that convening and discussion.
Awesome.
That's a little bit about us.
Great.
Maybe just share that we, in our 22 years as a foundation, we have we're like about $100,000 shy of closing in on the $100 million mark in grant making. So we've, over our 22 years of history, we've made $100 million in grants to about 12,200 nonprofits over those 22 years. So just a little bit about the impact of all of our funds, 230 funds here at the Community Foundation.
Well, that's great. And I'm glad you kind of delineated in the intro that you are a foundation, but you talked a little bit about the support and understanding of the nonprofit world and how that impacts community. Because that's kind of, what I'm hoping to do is take just our discussion from those two different angles, from the foundation angle, and then from, kind of what you're seeing out there in the world with nonprofits. And so, from the foundation perspective, what's been the impact, or what's transpired with foundations as it relates to COVID-19?
Oh, that's a big question.
Let's start with the easy one first.
I think, great. I think that, overall, it's been very heartwarming to see the response by private foundations and community foundations in general around the COVID relief and response. There's a best practices around disaster philanthropy. And that's where I've seen the change in the trend in how giving has happened since COVID, which is really digging deep for foundations who have discretionary assets to really, if there was ever a reason to go more than a spending policy or more than the amount that you normally give in a year, this is the time. There is no better time to do it than there is now. And giving unrestricted discretionary support. So using that trust that you have with the nonprofits that you've granted to before, we call them grantees, and really understanding that you support them and they do good work in the community. So now an unrestricted operating gift to support whatever they believe are the greatest needs, and entrust in them that those resources are going to be delivered to the people who need them most. So I would say that's a little bit of the difference as to what's happening, particularly since the pandemic. At the Community Foundation level, I think the other thing to note is, so there are 700 community foundations a little over 700 community foundations in the United States. And so what I think people, and I hope people have noticed, is that community foundations have stepped up during COVID-19. Almost all have created a pandemic or a COVID-19 relief or response fund. And so really using our relationships and convening power that we tend to have at a community foundation level, not just for funders, but for the nonprofit sector and for the municipalities, because it's taking all three legs of the stool to have the kind of impact that needs to be made during a crisis like this. So it's been it's been terrific to see community foundations step up and to do that coordinated effort and to invest in communities with co-funded massive amounts of dollars. Here at our community foundation, we've raised to date, and we're still raising resources, a little over $7 million in funding specifically around COVID response. We've awarded 5.5 million of that so far. And we're with rapid response grants up until the end of July. And we've since shifted to an open application phase for another $1.4 million over the next couple of months. So that's the kind of the trends that we're seeing in the community foundation world, is the relationships in philanthropy with pandemic response funds, and really driving philanthropy to in a bigger, more significant, larger quantity of giving happening right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you think foundations are going to, operationally have to evolve to continue either to support the nonprofits, or just, the general way foundations think and operate, and not maybe ECCF, but just in general, like philosophically, or or things like that, given the landscape of call it the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, I think private foundations and community foundations are different, so I'll respond specifically to community foundations. But unrestricted dollars, longer period of time, an investment in the organizations who are meeting the greatest needs, and particularly with an emphasis now more than ever where inequities exist.
Okay.
And so I think I know we've always known, right, from a funder's perspective, the inequities that are glaring and in your face as we have dealt with challenges in our communities. I think what this pandemic has done, and particularly the protests and the murder of George Floyd, is that it's opened a lot of people's eyes exactly how deep those inequities truly run. And so an investment in that work, I think, is where you'll start to see a little bit of a shift as well. A lot of us already fund in that arena, and those of us who don't are taking notice and saying, where can my dollars make a difference? Mm-hmm. So just, I guess, in terms of that.
You had mentioned earlier, capacity giving and things like that. I mean, are you seeing a need for greater nonprofit, greater investments in technology and capacity versus program to kind of hold the glue together?
Yeah. So the need is unrestricted.
Okay.
And I know that every nonprofit has a different need, right?
Yep.
So, I think that a lot of things are on hold in nonprofits right now, that they've canceled fundraising events. They're trying to figure out how to go virtual. They need additional supports and training on revenue diversification. All of those needs, which means that in a pandemic like this, they're just needing operating support to continue to open the doors and to do the work that they do, particularly our basic needs organizations and our arts community.
Okay.
The sector has been substantially hit by this. And so unrestricted operating support is what's needed now, and probably will be needed for the next 24 to 36 months. Okay. Program support is equally important, as we understand the lingering and the long-term impacts of COVID-19, from a health perspective, but also from an economic development perspective. Mm-hmm. Program solutions are something that will be important to fund in the coming years as well. But I guess that's where I think nonprofits need it most. The other thing nonprofits need, and we just did a study, we were part of a study with 12 other community foundations in the state, as well as Mass Nonprofit Network and Philanthropy Massachusetts. It was a survey of about 1,100 nonprofits in the state, and it was to help us understand financially where nonprofits are, And we did the survey like I think it was completed on July 1, and then we analyzed the results. It was around understanding where they are financially, and then it's also what capacity building training and education and learning needs do they need in order to either survive or to reimagine differently on the other side of COVID-19. And so, not surprising, the majority of nonprofits that responded, about 70% of them have less than 6 months of capital to be able to sustain.
Yeah.
In Essex County, half of our nonprofits are small nonprofits. So we have 4,000 nonprofits registered in Essex County, and half of them are under $500,000 budget size. So for them, it's less than 3 months of capital. So we see a huge need and a huge discussion right now, and they've said it, is they're interested in talking about partnerships, affiliations, and mergers. They're number one talking about partnerships, less interested in affiliations, and even less saying they need or want to talk about a merger. But that's a significant need, and it's work that you do as well, and you're seeing it, I'm sure. But we're trying that operating support is what will sustain those that are on the bubble to get to the other side of COVID, whether that's 6 months, it's 4 months, it's 2 months, we're going to be in this for a long haul. We want to make sure that they have access to training and education that helps them in any way, shape, or form ride the storm. So
that's excellent. Yeah, I know the pain threshold is through the roof for a lot of these organizations that, especially the smaller, even the bigger ones that put their, blood, sweat, and tears into it, to be faced with the harsh realities of, viability and what do we do now? So I think all the help that you're doing there is great. And so, as a community foundation, right, you can be a conduit for donors and their philanthropy. What are the donors thinking out there? Some of the big philanthropists, or even some of the ones that just, are giving a little bit here and there to make a difference. What's their mindset look like these days in terms of how they're viewing this, and those that they might give to?
So everyone was very private foundations, independent philanthropists, very, very philanthropic right out of the gate. So they understood their role. They knew what was needed from them in the March and the April and then the May. I think that what the big question for a lot of folks is the unknowns, right? How long will this last? If I continue to invest another significant amount of resources, am I going to be investing at the right time? Is the PPP is now coming to an end? A lot of organizations have used up their PPP. What happens now? And if I place another investment, what happens if we're still in not full reopening, or the schools don't go back to school in January? Will my resources be better spent in January, or is it better spent now? So it's just a matter of, philanthropists want to do the right thing. So we've never been in a situation like this. I mean, even when we were in the gas explosion relief work in the Merrimack Valley, we certainly didn't think it was going to take 18 months to come out of that. And we certainly didn't think it was going to, the dollar amount that we could invest was, we wouldn't have expected that we were going to be in it that long. So I think clearly in disaster philanthropy like this, there's an understanding that we are going to be in this much longer than everybody expects.
Yep.
Economic impacts of this are going to be even longer than that. And so when is the right time to deploy resources, and how much should be done in each kind of phase?
Yeah, that's a heck of a lot to consider in this complex landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other half of the conversation is, for one half focused on foundations. The other half is on the nonprofit community, and you guys serve so many of them. throughout Essex County, and I would say even beyond with some of maybe your programming, is what are the trends that you see or kind of going forward, that organizations are looking at, going after, or exploring? Kind of what's the word on the street?
Yeah. Amidst crisis, you see innovation. We see that happen, all the time. That's a trend in the nonprofit sector. I've been seeing more nonprofits working side by side with other nonprofits to meet needs, pivoting their business models to stop what they're doing or alter what they're doing and pick up a new line of business that's having a direct impact in the population in their community, and just being a part of the solution. And it's taking shape in form of innovative ways to do that, systems that need to be strengthened to do delivery systems for food security. I've seen really some innovative ways that partners are coming together and working together to unduplicate services and get resources out to people in need in a much more effective and efficient manner. So that's a trend that we're seeing. The merger acquisition discussion, we've talked about that already, is another significant need, especially as the PPP ending rears its ugly head now and in the coming months. I think leadership is another big trend. The organizations that are thriving and amidst all of this, I see the difference in the leadership, the board leadership, as well as the staff leadership, and being able to achieve greater mission during this time. And it's because they are big thinkers, well-connected, and their donors support them. And when a big, bold idea to pivot or to move in a direction is being supported by their donor base. So I've seen that as a real positive silver lining in a lot of this work. The other big trend, I think, on the nonprofit side is the financial impact of this crisis and how business continuity plans that weren't in place. Yeah. And okay, we're going to lose that revenue stream. So how do I diversify my revenue streams? That's a huge trend of need in nonprofits happening right about now. I think those, and some of them are positive and some of them are, come from a deficit base that they need education and training on, but that's mostly what I hear. And everybody needs to figure out how to do fundraising in the digital world. How do I convert?
A lot different, isn't it?
Yeah. Should I convert my big event to virtual? Is that even the right thing to do? And if it is the right thing to do, what are the platforms? How do I do that? How do I get people engaged to sign on and to log in at the right time? And so that's been a really big hurdle and probably the number one need that came out of the study from the nonprofits saying what they need for supports.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing a lot of people, having to cancel their events, because they were, caught up in it and didn't have time to get them over to virtual, and now re-engaging, or just, how much of fundraising and philanthropy is relationship based, and not being able to shake somebody's hand or meet them for dinner and a coffee or something like that. It's a real challenge. But you mentioned something that I thought was awesome, was just the board engagement and how that's a recipe for success, in terms of getting, whether it's a board of 5 or a board of 20, that's 5 or 20 active advocates that can act as a bridge in some way, shape, or form. I think the challenge that we've seen, I'd just be interested in your feedback on this, is that the board members, depending upon who they are going through the same thing with their companies and things like that. So it's being able to get the attention and the capacity and the bandwidth of the board members who maybe, I've worked on with some boards where, there's a lot of philanthropists, a lot of entrepreneurs, on the board, and so they're having to course correct and adjust, and maybe went through a huge revenue loss, and so trying to keep them engaged on both sides, it's very challenged between their day job if they're not retired, as well as the board work.
Yeah, I would say another part of the silver lining, though, is, and this, not that this is a good thing, but we haven't had a lot to do, right? Outside of no place to go. There's no
other than ride on our Peloton bikes and go for long walks, and yeah.
Yeah. So at least, at our board, what we've found is they're highly engaged. We did Zoom before, but only as a worst case scenario, join us by Zoom. The embracement of technology has allowed board members to stay connected. Now, if they choose to, is the big key word. But I think that, and I'm hearing from other nonprofits, as we talk about boards, are you still doing your board meeting? I just did a survey. Are you still holding your board meetings? Is your board more engaged or less engaged now? And you'd be surprised that during a crisis like this, the board members want to feel valued and they want to contribute something. So showing up and listening and reacting to ideas and decision-making, I've seen in a lot of cases that there's increased engagement by board members now than there was prior.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that.
So not always, every organization's different. But so I just share that. I think that part of the isolation piece is, when you're a board member, you're part of that organization's community. And I think that this time of isolation has reminded people that where they connect and where they become a community
100%.
is a place to cherish. And there's a reason to engage, because there's big decisions that need to be made.
So you talk about nonprofits and you talk about community engagement or convening power that ECCF does. How can foundations take a more strategic approach in supporting, kind of that intersection of nonprofit, community, philanthropy, and just like all the stakeholders that would be in a community?
Yeah, I think there's been a big shift, and we've seen it in the community foundation world, but we also see it evidenced by the partners, the private foundations that we partner with on a lot of our work, is this shift to systems change work, a strategic way in which to approach philanthropy. And I'll give you just an example. So we have donor advised funds here at the Community Foundation, and those donors are giving to operating support and annual gifts to organizations. It's all very important. We have other field of interest funds and donor advised funds who give programmatic support. All important work to do. There's a role, though, in philanthropy for co-funded efforts where you can pool donations, charitable giving, into a large bucket and have the kind of dollars to have significant impact that could actually address root causes, so that maybe down the road we don't need so many cans of food on a food pantry shelf, right? There's this thought process and approach. We call it systems philanthropy, and it's an investment it starts with research, right? So we have what's called impactessexcounty.org. You go on our website, you can get a link to it. It's our indicators website. It has 100 different measurable data points about the health and well-being of Essex County by city and town, if it's available. And so we look at what the data shows, and then we invite to the table to have dialogue and discussion about what the root causes are of a particular data point that we're interested in. And then we go and we look at, well, what organizations are already doing work that's working? And if they had an investment of charitable dollars, could they scale that to a population level type change in that arena? So a lot of nonprofits are doing that kind of work. They're still giving annual operating and programmatic support, but they're also co-funding with other funders systems change work to try to address the root causes, so that we're putting band-aids on things and we're putting interventions into things, but we're also stopping the bleeding at the same time. And the thing that we see a lot of is the cross-sector parts of the system, right? a nonprofit can't do their work alone. The city or the town has to value the work that they're doing, because the city is also trying to address that same problem with government dollars. And then you have business leaders who care about the affordable housing or care about, food security in their community, and they have charitable dollars to invest as well, like us, like we are as a funder. And so if we all can come together and we can understand a shared vision for change, and we're all going to affect it with our dollars, well, then maybe we can really start to change the system and address big problems. And so that's, I think, more of the strategic thinking and the long-term multi-year commitment over a set of shared outcomes, highly engaged in convening around the table, and a partner in the work, as opposed to just a check and come back and see us in a year. Not that that's not helpful. It's just a different kind of philanthropy. That's where we see some of the strategic change going in the foundation world.
I like that. It acts as a force multiplier when you look at it from that perspective. I think, having those relationships in place that you can leverage is a catalyst to organizing those systems. But that's a great way to look at it. Holistic.
And it breaks down systems too. I mean, if we call the mayor and say, hey, this nonprofit needs to talk about this particular permit or why they need this, then the conversation flows. It doesn't require us to get in the middle of it, but when the system's broken, then there's a different way to fix it too.
Yeah, it certainly reduces the spending on the same initiatives and the same things by, just different players and consolidation of that. It makes a heck of a lot of sense. So I always, like to find out a little bit about you and kind of what some of your biggest leadership lessons have been in 2020. Anything stand out in particular to, what you've learned this year?
Amidst COVID-19?
You've had two crises back to back with the gas explosions in the Merrimack Valley and now COVID-19. It's like, you're a veteran now at crisis management.
Yeah, I don't want to be.
Nobody does.
I think for 2020, it's clearly about managing the pandemic, and for us, it's the understanding what the economic impact is going to be. I think the biggest lesson, for me out of it is looking at the leaders in organizations who are being innovative in what they're doing. So always thinking about, it's a cliche, but thinking about the glass half full, not half empty, and why do we do this? Why do we do it differently? Asking the right questions is another big piece of lessons learned. Relationships is another one. We learned in the gas explosions, and I've seen it even like at a super higher level in this pandemic, is you need to have trusted relationships now prior to a disaster.
Yeah.
When the PPP was announced, as an example, we fund and support we're part of a coalition in the Merrimack Valley on business relief. And it's 4 phone calls. Everybody's jumping on Zoom. How are we going to get all of our Spanish-speaking small businesses and all of our small businesses the TA they need to apply for the PPP? If those relationships weren't there, those businesses would have been at a much higher risk of closing because the infrastructure was built, the relationships were there from the gas explosion work that we did. So, or that we were a part of. And so that's a big, huge lesson for me, is every relationship that you build needs to be cherished and cultivated, because when you're in crisis, you have to tap those and you can't start from scratch, because you might as well hang it up at that point. It's going to take that much longer to build the infrastructure needed to deliver on crisis services.
Yeah, and it's overwhelming, and I totally agree with that. In that, when this happened, is it was all about connecting with people, one, to make sure that they were okay, but two, how you can support each other.
Right.
And to see some of the leadership arise during this year and just rise to the occasion of dealing with this has been humbling to be a part of those conversations and watch some of these leaders and how they handle such tremendous stresses and threats and you know, and employment issues and things like that. So I hear you.
Yeah.
It's been a lot. Well, you know, Beth, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. This has been amazing to learn a little
Thanks
bit.
For having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if anybody
and
wants
for all the work that thanks for all the work that you do. We rely on Curtis Strategy to connect with nonprofits, have a conversation about how to, you know, where they need to go or how they need to, what they need help with. And so you are a huge asset in the social sector picture as well.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And you know, if anybody wants to find out more about Beth, her team, and the great work at ECCF, click the link below. If you're also interested in hearing other stories and discussions with great leaders like Beth, please subscribe. And thank you for watching.